Caden, hero, villain, or both? Fantasy worlds allow for unique circumstances, and Caden, a character in the Licanius Trilogy by James Islington, certainly has a distinctive and horrifying history. Today, I will be studying Caden's socialization, both in the beginning of his life and later after he wipes his memories. Caden's agents of socialization, including friendships, religion, work, and education, are crucial to the formation of his character. Before diving into Caden's life, let's look at how the world came to be and understand society from an anthropological perspective. There are many religions in Islington's mystical world, but the most mentioned one is the Old Religion, which claims that El, a benevolent deity, created the world. Also of great power is Shamaloth, a malevolent being who opposes El. Both beings play a critical role in Caden's socialization. An unknown time before the events of the Licanius Trilogy, a mysterious race known as the Builders built many magnificent cities using magic. Society itself, throughout all of Caden's 4,000-year life, appears to remain technologically the same. Clothing, methods of travel, and forms of work are very much like those in medieval times, with most characters riding on horseback or walking, and all countries run by kings or queens. However, the existence of magic adds a different dimension, as a select few in society are able to use it. Caden, an orphan, is born Telkamar Deshral, and he is raised in a country where orphans have an excellent education and are treated very well. He falls in love with Eliavia, the daughter of a nobleman, and marries her. The wedding concludes the first part of Caden's socialization, in which he has a privileged childhood and becomes a person that people admire. Eliavia is a key figure in his socialization because he becomes very attached to her, and her words, ideas, and existence play a role throughout Caden's life. The next 100 years in Caden's life are much darker, but even more important to his socialization. On the night of their wedding, Eliavia dies, and in an effort to revive her, Caden accidentally takes all life present with magic. So horrified by his actions and unable to bear the pain of so many deaths, he attempts to hang himself. The books only briefly touch on Caden's experiences after the death of his wife, so it is difficult to determine what exact psychological disorders Caden may be experiencing. However, it can be assumed that he has post-traumatic stress disorder. Caden's impulsive action to try to save Eliavia, using a form of magic he was not even aware existed, caused depression and complicated grief. Caden recalls, time, almost a year now, hadn't dulled the edge of the guilt, hadn't helped his horror to fade. For helping oneself through the loss of a spouse, finding a support system is recommended, but since Caden had killed his closest friends at the wedding, he could not do this. Other treatment methods for complicated grief include eating well, sleeping, exercising, and talking with others. What Caden did during this year is unknown, but eventually he decides to take his own life to free himself from his grief. His first attempt fails, and he discovers his body self-heals, so he has a captain decapitate him. Rather than dying, Caden wakes up in another land, in another body. He begins to hunt extremely dangerous and poisonous creatures for a living. He spends this money on alcohol in order to stay in a drunken stupor, another sign of depression. He hunts the creatures because the poison does not kill him, but, after the poison had taken effect, were the only times that he got anything close to something resembling sleep. One day, he encounters a being of light while hunting and begins to pursue it obsessively. Rumination occurs when a person has repetitive thoughts and obsesses over something, to the extent that in the person's mind the thing has much greater importance than it does in reality. Rumination can be caused by depression, and it is prevalent in the next years in Caden's life. Caden's furious searching for the being drives him almost to madness, and King Alaris has Caden imprisoned for a lifetime to protect himself and others. Alaris is critical to Caden's socialization, and he, like Caden, is immortal. During his years in prison, Alaris visits Caden regularly, and he is described as more than just a friend. He was Caden's savior, he was a mentor, he was a brother, a man like whom Caden could only aspire to be. Through Alaris' friendship, Caden becomes a better person, and when released after 80 years, although he continues pursuing the being of light, he is a changed man, ready to do good in the world. His imprisonment concludes a dark chapter and is a harbinger of many centuries of good to come. When Caden is 450, he meets Cassandra, another immortal who gives Caden a series of prophecies about the future and claims that their immortality is a gift from El. At first, Caden is dismissive of the prophecies, but they all come true. For 2 years, Caden trains with the Chalice, who teach him to use a type of magic. The Chalice have a large impact on Caden's life, shaping him into a skilled fighter and also affecting Caden's understanding of magic and the world. Finally, Caden is convinced that Cassandra is right, and he is the last to join the Venerate, a group of 11 immortals. The group is led by El, who claims that Shamaloth has trapped him, and that humans are forced to live without free will. El tells him repeatedly, "You are always doing his will or mine, but never yours." and the Venerate consider themselves the blade of El, meaning that they are not truly responsible for their actions. In this way, religion is crucial to Caden's socialization. Helped by the prophecies of El, the Venerate protect thousands of people from tyrannical rulers, disease, and more. The extent to which religion impacted Caden is shown through this quote from another Venerate to Caden: "You were the hardest to convince, and then the most fervent to believe." El is the only one who can give what Caden craves: peace. After hundreds of years of working with the Venerate, El requests that Caden destroy an entire civilization to force the few remaining people to build a time travel device. El says, "I ask that you look to the greater good. I ask that you remember that all that is done will be undone. And I ask that you never forget that these sins will be mine to bear, not yours. Become the man the world needs, even if it is a man whom you despise." So Caden does it. Under the name of Archine Devade, he destroys almost all the Doresians, losing his friendships with the Venerate because they do not believe that El would condone something so horrible. He becomes accustomed to mounting hits on pikes, murdering thousands, and doing only what benefits his ends. Politics, overexposure to violence, and El all play major roles in his socialization at this point, melding him into a cruel monster. His stubborn insistence that all he is doing is for the greater good prevents him from growing. Interestingly, Eliavia's death, now over 10 centuries in the past, continues to play a role as Caden believes that he can be with Eliavia again by forcing the Doresians to send the world back in time. About 900 years after first attacking the Doresians, Caden tries to use the time machine that they built, but it blows up. Out of the ashes comes someone who identifies himself as Davian and says he is from the future. The dialogue between Caden and the so-called Davian is stunning. Among insults and harsh, truthful words, Davian tells Caden, "You need to recognize that El is not who he says he is. You also need to accept that it is your fault and that there is no undoing it." Caden is so mad that he kills Davian. Despite trying to ignore Davian's words, Caden realizes the error in his ways and over almost 2,000 years manages to convince himself that who he thought El is actually Shameloth. Although much happens in these years, due to the lack of prominent socialization, I will skip to the point where Caden decides to wipe his memories. Caden, by choice, loses his memory, assuming the name of Caden for the first time. After being imprisoned under the charge of murdering an entire village, he is freed by Davian. Davian has a huge impact on Caden's re-socialization. Davian supports Caden as he tries to remember who he was before, and when nearing death, Caden repeats Davian's words, saying, "Be the man I aspire to be." Davian shows Caden what it means to be good and fight for something greater without pushing morals aside. Caden meets one of the Venerate, Asar, to restore Caden's memories. At this point, Caden must come to terms with the fact that he is one of the most feared legends in the country, Archine Devade. His shock and anxiety, accentuated by the fact that he thought he had to fight Devade, is demonstrated through his reaction when he barely eats, sleeps, and drinks, avoiding the company of Asar. Asar is a mentor to Caden, helping Caden to come to terms with who he was before. However, Asar is soon killed. Caden flees, and on his way he meets a variety of people who impact him, and he slowly regains his memories, trying to separate who he is now from who he was. Eventually he is captured by one of the Venerate, and Davian, despite knowing that Caden is Archine Devade, believes that Caden can be a good person, choosing to trust and free Caden. This act of faith impresses and surprises Caden. Finally, Caden is forced to face Shameloth. As a price for something Caden wants, Shameloth makes him relive all the terrible things he'd done. Wars, crushing hearts, imprisoning others, manipulating those who loved him, outbursts of anger. He recollects, and yet he knew that these were not even all the terrible things he'd done. They were only the worst. Everything was shame, deep and dark and red. At this point, Caden claims he is responsible for his actions and that he knew they were wrong. By doing so, he fights against what Shameloth has made him believe. He fights the philosophy he has been socialized with. Caden, when about to succumb to Shameloth's convincing arguments, is saved by Davian's words, and they win the battle against Shameloth. In the end of the epilogue, Caden does manage to travel back in time, and briefly he speaks with Eliavia. Then, he is taken to the time just after the time machine exploded. He shapeshifts into Davian and speaks with his younger self, setting himself on the path for change. Eliavia, Alaris, and Davian, along with education, work, and religion, are the agents of Caden's socialization. The friends and enemies we keep are crucial to our mental and social development. The world which surrounds us makes us who we are, and accepting our own flaws and mistakes is an important first step to make a change for the better. Caden eventually accepted he had done wrong and was following the wrong philosophy. We too have to be accepting of our faults and question what our socialization has impressed upon us.